Yes, it's officially afternoon, so I wish everyone good afternoon, happy new year. Good to see the PSC community gathering back here in January as we always do every year. And as we've done for the last several years, we are very happy to have a presentation on the state of the North Pacific Ocean. Over the last several years, many of you know this has become an increasingly popular and well-attended part of the seminar series. Today, we're very, very happy to have Dr. Laurie Weitkamp from NOAA Fisheries, and on the Canadian side, Dr. Jackie King and a number of collaborators you can see on the title slide there, helping to review what's been happening biologically and non-biologically in the North Pacific to help us understand drivers of ocean survival for salmon. Dr. King will go first with her presentation online. She's joining us remotely. You can see her at the top of the screen there. When she is done, we will turn it over to Dr. Weitkamp to pick up the ball. And then at the end of the two presentations, we'll be able to take questions from the audience. We have microphones that we can run around the room so that people online can hear. And then I'll work with John here to moderate or understand incoming questions from those of us, those participants who are joining online. We've got we've got a couple dozen folks joining online as well. Jackie, with that, I will turn it over to you if you're ready to go.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Um, Hello, my name is Dr. Jackie King. I'm a research scientist at the Pacific Biological Station in Nanaimo, British Columbia. I head up a program that has about 10 weeks of field work for juvenile salmon uh, in the coastal waters as they first enter the ocean. Today, I'm going to talk about marine ecosystems and conditions for 2026 returns. I will also include freshwater conditions because freshwater and marine habitats are obviously linked through global processes and atmospheric processes, and integral to what you see in terms of what's going into ocean entry and coming back as returns. I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors. Jennifer Bolt would previously give this talk. Jennifer is one of the co-chairs of the Canadian State of Pacific Ocean, or SOPO, reports. Much of this is drawn from the report from last year, 2024 conditions. And Bronwyn McDonald and Sue Grant, both of DFO, are part of our State of Salmon team, and a lot of the freshwater components were provided by them. A lot of discussion between all four of us and our co-authors. Which, there we go. Broadly speaking, are a whole range of individuals, mainly from DFO. I do want to point out we do have co-authors from the Pacific Salmon Commission, led by Steve Lantham and University of Victoria. We've drawn a lot of information from, as I mentioned, the SOPO report for conditions in 2024. That report is published online, and you can use this QR code if you'd like to go and follow along. I'll be looking at years in both freshwater, so the spawning to fry stream, fry lake conditions, and the marine environment for the 2026 returns. And depending on species or life histories, the relevant years for spawning conditions, freshwater rearing, and ocean living vary. I'll also be speaking mainly about conditions in British Columbia, and for Canada, the relevant areas are South Coast, the Salish Sea, including the Strait of Georgia, flowing out to Juan de Fuca, and the west coast of Vancouver Island, along with Central and North Coast. There's a strong focus today on the Salish Sea and the west coast of Vancouver Island. I do want to note that stocks from Puget Sound or the Columbia River do migrate either through southern Salish Sea areas or west coast Vancouver Island. So it is relevant to some of the American stocks, obviously, on their way to the Gulf of Alaska. We'll be looking at freshwater habitat and marine habitat, and here are some of the conditions or factors that we'll be looking at. First up, let's focus on the freshwater habitat. And here you can see, sorry, everyone, there we go. I had to minimize my Zoom. For the bandwidth, I'm also going to take off my video. Sorry about that. So first up, let's focus on the freshwater habitat. For 2026 returns, the important years to look at are 2021 to 2024, and it can vary for perhaps spawning and incubation here or time spent in lakes or streams. We've included it because salmon, well, they have challenges migrating upstream to their spawning grounds. And of course, that results in the number of fry produced. But also, obviously, what they experience in the lakes and streams impacts what actually eventually makes it to the ocean conditions. We'll be looking at temperature, river flow, snowpack, precipitation, and drought, all relating to that. Fraser River sockeye spawner size. And I just want to note that we'll be using air temperature. So annual river temperatures are not available for most of our BC Yukon systems, but it's now common. I just want to note for each year to have days where river temperatures exceed 18 degrees C at some point in the spring or summer. Those can result in decreased adult salmon swimming performance, and some rivers reach above 20 degrees, which is adult mortality, disease, egg mortality, and legacy effects even on juvenile conditions in the ocean. There we go. So in 2021, in terms of temperatures, and again, here air temperatures, snowpack that we saw, and precipitation. Generally speaking, the spring months were closer to long-term averages in terms of temperature, but you could see by July or June that notorious heat dome that was in July was in full effect across most of the province. Snowpack was average to well above average in the northern portions until about June, and precipitation in July was average in some areas, but you could see below average in Southeast BC and Vancouver. The Fraser River temperatures exceeded 18 to 20 degrees for this year. I also want to note, I forgot to say this, that for each of these slides, there's information again in that SOPO report. So this is updating information from Curie Lang and Da, starts on page 20. If I forget to mention this, it's available for each of the slides. In 2021, we saw much of the same with some perhaps cool spring temperatures, which was nicer, closer to average. But again, warm summer, those summer conditions extended into late August. The Fraser River was again exceeding 18 to 20 degrees. And while there was good snowpack in June, precipitation in August was quite low. In 2023, this was a record warm on average across the whole province, and it came in at almost the number one compared to 1950 or 1920-23 data in almost all of the basins. It was the fourth driest on record, and those dry conditions continued through much of the winter of 2022 to 23, so it was already there in the spring. And again, the Fraser River exceeded 18 to 20 degrees. In 2024, this was unfortunately the second warmest year on record. The drought that I'll talk about or show you in the next slide persisted. The Fraser River was again warm. We had record warm in North and South Thompson, Okanagan, and Kootenays, and below to near normal precipitation. So it did not look good in terms of freshwater for 2021 to 2024. BC, so this is also 2021 drought, 2022, 23, 24, green being drought level 0, sufficient water, up to the darkest red, drought level 5, adverse impacts of to socioeconomic or ecosystem values almost certain, so extreme. BC experienced extended multi-year drought conditions that were unique to the past century, both in how long and the severity. So these reds in numerous, if not all of our river systems. In 2021 here, there was rapid snow melt from a super hot June, followed by a very dry summer. You saw peak drought intensity here in about August. It impacted almost every region except for here, the Northwest and the Stikine rivers. In 2022, there was extreme drought here in the late summer and fall. Of note, you could see those northern rivers are starting to experience drought. And this drought here by the end of the year carried on into 2023, where we saw record-breaking province-wide drought. Those conditions are prolonged, severe, impactful, and province-wide. In 2024, some of the drought conditions continued, and it did appear to ease slightly through the summer, and they didn't really improve until the fall storms here started to hit. So the take-home story is in the years for 2026 returns, rivers or throughout the province experience some level of extreme drought. Other major things to note, the fall of 2021 was when we saw devastating flooding in southern BC. And in 2023 here, wildfires in BC burned to more than double the area of the previous record year, which was 2018. And it was 10 times the 20-year average. So both flooding like this impact and wildfires alter the topography around rivers and stream, releasing sediment and trace elements into the water. When we look at biological indicators like the Fraser River sockeye spawning size, so this comes from work contributed by the PSC staff, the lengths of both Ocean 2 and Ocean 3 ages of Fraser River sockeye ranked among the 7th smallest, even among 31 even-numbered years since 1964. There was an increase in 2023, 2024, but it's still overall a declining trend. So while they were improvements from 2022 and 2020, we're still at below average. So for the Fraser River sockeye, those spawners are returning at a lower than average size. If we switch to the marine environment, here looking at things like temperature, upwelling, and ocean, we have some biological indicators to look at, specifically prey, predators, and I'll talk about our juvenile salmon indices. For 2026 returns, we're interested in these years, 2023 to 2024. I will note that we're still collating, or 2025 ocean condition results are not collated until March of this year. But I do have results from our juvenile salmon indices from the surveys we conducted in 2025. Starting off with sea surface temperatures, here we are for 2024. They're generally above the long-term average throughout the whole BC coast, particularly actually on north and central coasts. So there is this continued long-term trend of almost 1 degree per 100 years. And we have the waters are warmer than average since about 1912. Here I've indicated strong or very strong El Nino years. Just want to note that 2023 was a very strong, and 2024 had a warm anomaly only, no El Nino event. However, I can't talk about sea surface temperatures without noting that it's now warm all the time. Everywhere warm all the time. This is global surface temperatures, so different than sea surface temperatures, and again, it's globally. And all the color coding here indicates are red El Nino events and cold La Nina events. There's just some observations from this slide that I want to drive home. First is that nearly every month since about the late 1970s has been above the 20th century average, and it's been warming throughout the period. So not only in terms of air temperature, it does mean that there is now a lot of thermal energy stored globally in the oceans. Second, of course, is that these red El Nino years, so these are the months in red, they tend to be warmer, for example, than the La Nina-like conditions that are here in blue, and they tend to increase in terms of warming as the El Nino event goes on, or the La Nina, they tend to cool. That's not different. But what we do need to note, and here that 2023 strong El Nino, is that these global surface air temperatures uh, aren't necessarily linked to patterns that we saw previously with ENSO events. So the ENSO linkages to productivity or even conditions in freshwater or off the coast are broken, and I'll show you an indication of that in upcoming zooplankton side, because this figure illustrates that the warmer all the time, it doesn't really matter if it's a La Nina year, it's still a warm year versus an ENSO year. We're now just talking about warm all the time. And that warm all the time means that marine heat waves are becoming more common. The first noted, I think, in 2015, called the blob, but there always seems to be a heat wave out there. What is not necessarily obvious now is whether these are unique heat waves events or are the summer seasons just being extended. So that thermal energy that's stored in global oceans are already high, the summers are extended. So these periods or areas of extreme high surface temperatures are just becoming more and more common. This is satellite sea surface temperatures, and they show in red the warm anomalies that are present throughout 2023 and into 2024. You can see in some years towards the late summer, there are cooling along the continental shelf areas of the California current. So that does have different impacts than what fish are encountering out in the Gulf of Alaska. In 2025, updating this, it doesn't look like it was much different. It was called a severe heat wave in the summer of 2025. It was extended throughout most of the North Pacific, all the way to Japan and Korea during summer and into fall of September. And again, waters surrounding Vancouver Island and off the coast of Washington and Oregon did have within the spring periods of cool waters. We're also seeing increased widespread hypoxia events. So here are a couple of different looks at mooring stations and glider information off of our coast. You can see off of the southwest coast of Vancouver Island at this mooring location, there has been a general decline, whether it's at 50, 100, or 100, whether it's at 50, 75, 100, or 125 meters. This general decline in oxygen over the time series from 1978 to 2023. This is from the Scott 2 mooring, which is about roughly about out here. I think you can see that. You can see these red bars denoting hypoxia-like conditions that were observed in July 2023. And again, throughout the whole range of coast to near shelf break. So here, these are three different mooring ones, you can see this general decline in oxygen is observed throughout the coast and on the continental shelf. In 2023, we had a late start to the spring upwelling. So this area is the California current system with a transition in spring to upwelling, which is generally associated with productivity. So the current California current system is driven by coastal upwelling. Years in which you have stronger than average upwelling tends to be associated with coastal productivity. And in 2023, 2024, there was a low to average start and magnitude to the upwelling. It should have been associated with below average coastal productivity. But like I said, with ENSO events and warm versus cold events, it's not necessarily the case. For zooplankton, you can see that the old relationship we had between zooplankton and temperature is breaking down, or zooplankton and ENSO versus El Nino events. So typically warm waters or years in which there is poorer upwelling, there should be poor food web productivity. And within zooplankton, you see it warmer waters associated with southern copepods. And those southern copepods are smaller, they're less lipid rich, so they're not very nutritious for things like small salmon that feed on them when they first enter the ocean. But, and typically we would see years in which there were warmer waters, strong ENSO events, more southern copepods, and below average boreal, or these larger energy rich zooplankton. But since about 2021, that's broken down, and we now see above average southern and boreal copepods, and this is unlike the previous 20 years. So the bottom of the food web for salmon and their prey had lipid, energy-rich zooplankton for the years that we're interested in for 2026 returns. And as juvenile salmon in the ocean get larger, they do switch to prey items, specifically euphausids, decapods, and amphipods. And you can see that the preferred prey items of juvenile salmon in summertime are also sustained above average biomass almost universally. And in 2024, there was actually a great or a much improved year of euphausids, which is a highly sought after zooplankton prey item for salmon and many other forage fish, such as herring, hake, etc. In the Strait of Georgia, we also saw above average sustained biomass in recent years. Medium and large copepods over here in the bottom left had highest contributions to the biomass. And those, again, are things that juvenile salmon are looking for. And in fact, even the biomass of the large boreal copepod Neocalanus plumcris has increased in recent years. So that's here, the blue contribution to the biomass. Also of interest are prey items for the juvenile salmon. This is, this is Pacific herring biomass off of the west coast of Vancouver Island. You can see in recent years, 2023, 2024, the biomass has been increasing and is significantly higher than it was in 2026 and earlier. These are prey items for adult Chinook and coho salmon. What I'm showing here is modeled biomass estimates for trawls conducted off of the west coast of Vancouver Island with our nighttime pelagic survey that ended in 2014, and now our ongoing integrated pelagic ecosystem survey from 2017 onwards. So these estimates are estimated with spatial temporal model, and you can see not only does it provide distributional information, but you can see the hot spots like off of La Perouse, Sparkly Sound are maintained, and spots just north of Brooks Peninsula. Those are typically in our juvenile salmon catches, areas that we find high abundance of juvenile salmon. In terms of the Strait of Georgia, age 0 Pacific herring had above average biomass or abundance in 2023. Here on the left is the mean catch and catch per unit effort for all standard stations conducted in the juvenile herring survey in the Strait of Georgia. 2023, the index of relative abundance was above average, and in 2024, we're back to the near time series mean. Age 0 herring were smaller than average, but their condition was above average, meaning they were pretty fat and nutritious given their size. On the right, just to note, is the mean catch weight and catch per unit effort of northern anchovy in the Strait of Georgia, again coming from, I believe, coming from the September juvenile herring survey. And in 2024 here, northern anchovy relative biomass was the second of the time series. So northern anchovy is both a competitor for small juvenile herring, juvenile salmon, but also a prey item. And Pacific herring coastwide shows a continued increasing trend in estimated spawning biomass. And now we're at a situation where the Strait of Georgia and the West Coast stocks comprise the majority. And there's been, in yellow, you can see the West Coast Vancouver Island stock, a recent increase in that stock. Moving to predators in and here we have selected salmon predators from the groundfish survey and stock assessment availability. Petrale sole survey, an estimate was recently completed, and they are estimated to be above their limit reference point. So above actually their upper stock reference point. So they're doing very well. Other predators like lingcod in the Strait of Georgia or outside, so that would be the west coast of Vancouver Island and other coastal waters, are also high or improving to relatively stable. But predators like Pacific spiny dogfish in the Strait of Georgia and on the west coast are actually in declines. And this is despite, for dogfish, I will note, despite low fishing pressure for dogfish compared to historic levels. So dogfish are a predator, but also they do consume a lot of euphausids, specifically on the west coast of Vancouver Island. So again, another predator. Pacific hake, this information comes from surveys conducted with the US. They are biennial, so the last survey is 2023 that I can show. It was the third lowest biomass recorded for North America. It has the lowest stock proportion in Canada of the whole time series, and the lowest biomass as well in Canada. And for the migrating hake stock in 2024, the Canadian commercial fishery had its lowest landings in history, with less than 4,000 tons. And that was only about 3% of the quota attained. Another predator, harbor seals. I don't have any information to, harbor seals here is the US breeding population. Sorry, I did change this slide. I just wanted to note that harbor seals is stable or decreasing within BC. Sorry, on the left here is the US breeding population of California sea lions. So it has stabilized since about 2014 and remained at such levels. However, the number of rookeries in BC, or year-round haulouts, the rookeries are in red, the haulouts, year-round haulouts, are in yellow, continues to increase in BC waters. And in a survey in 2021, they discovered 4 new year-round haulouts and 2 new rookeries. So California sea lions are staying here longer, having larger rookeries and breeding here at more places. Let's move to the juvenile salmon indices. So these are similar to the salmon surveys conducted off of Oregon, Washington by NOAA. These have been in place since 1998. I'm showing here the toes on the Vancouver Island continental shelf since 1998 up until 2025. We use a spatial temporal model to account for differences in the where, when, the gear, or the head rope depth. So what we do produce is an annual index that's actually on a log scale. So the bars here also indicate the 95 confidence intervals. So if they're overlapping this long-term average, I'm just going to consider them average. In 2024-25, for the Chinook, these are mainly West Coast Vancouver Island Chinooks. We encounter Columbia River Chinooks in the summer. Those were below average. In chum, we saw below average 2023 and 2024 catches, and those are mainly Strait of Georgia stocks in the fall. We saw typically either it was West Coast or Puget Sound stocks. Those are the dominant stocks that we encounter in our surveys. Those were average for the years of interest here. And in 2025, I will note that this is not a pink year, but we did see below average, pink in summer, not fall. And in sockeye, we saw below average in summer and fall. So those are West Coast VI stocks and Strait of Georgia stocks. Of note, and was kind of hopeful for 2023 and 2024, they were average. It was much improved from previous years. We conduct a similar survey in the Strait of Georgia. Again, this time series begins in the 2000s, so 25 years worth of data. Same type of model, a spatial temporal model. So this is an abundance index on a log scale. 2024 and 2025, we saw below average Chinook. We saw below average chum in both years in the fall. Coho are still maintaining an above average abundance. So looking good for all of the years, including 2024. Those 95% intervals here just sort of touch on the long-term average. Pink, again, this is not a pink year, but for what it's worth, below average conditions in both summer and fall. And unfortunately, below average conditions in 2025. I put this in parentheses because the confidence intervals are wide. We did not catch many sockeye at all. So of course that contributes to variance of the estimate. So it really should be interpreted, I guess, with caution because it could be considered average. So taken all together, in freshwater, there were some average conditions in some regions and some years, but mainly I think we're safe to say it's hot and dry and there's been extreme flooding events and fire events. In the marine habitat, it's always warm, so much so that marine heat waves are frequent and persistent, including in the high seas. You will sometimes get cool coastal waters, but the good news is there's been nutritious copepods. There's been above average preferred prey biomass, including euphausiids in 2024. There is a high and stable abundance of predators, but there has been a decline in some competitors. So the take-home message is that if you can survive this freshwater habitat and make it to these difficult ocean conditions, there is some reprieve in the food web that might help you out. The good news, I guess, would be the continued above average abundance indice for our Strait of Georgia coho stocks in our surveys. And again, I invite you to use the QR code to go look at the State of the Pacific Ocean report. If you're interested in attending, and you can attend it virtually, the State of the Pacific Ocean meeting for 2025 conditions, please send them an email. It's held in Nanaimo over 4 days. And with that, I'll send it over to Laurie, and I'll stay online to take any questions at the end of her presentation.
Thank you, Jackie. And I'm going to talk about the West Coast, California current, and also a little bit about Alaska. And I think a lot of what you just heard from Jackie, I'm going to be saying in a slightly different format, but it's basically the same story. And I'm going to focus a little bit more on 2025, but it has been yet another hot year. What I'd like to do is talk about first physical environmental factor drivers, some of which you just heard from Jackie, biological response, and end with some forecasts, what we think is going to happen. And I think really the bottom line is that we had this massive heat wave in 2025, and it actually looks still pretty good for salmon, given how much heat was out there, as I will show you, which is really the take home. I think we're still going to be understanding this 2025 heat wave in the future, next year and the year after, as things kind of we learn a lot more about what really happened. But so far, it doesn't look horrible given what we had. Okay, so physical drivers, these are kind of affect the salmon habitats out in the ocean. Jackie mentioned this, the 2024 was the warmest year on record. 2025 is now perhaps going to be the second or third. 2025 and 2023 are within 0.01 degree of each other. And we are still waiting for the December data. So it's been warm out there globally, which is really, and because of that, then the past becomes less useful to predict the future. And this idea, oh yeah, we're going to go back to what it used to be like, I think the probability of that or chance of that is really declining. We have El Niños and La Niñas that are measured out in the El Niño 3-4 box. La Niñas are the cold phase. El Niños are the warm phase. And we're interested in them because in winter, they affect our weather. Particularly, it tends to be cold and wet in the Pacific Northwest during La Niñas and warm in El Niños. And right now, we have a weak La Nina at the equator. And so potentially we will see these colder and wetter conditions, but they haven't exactly shown up yet, as anybody who's been outside today or tried to go skiing can tell you. So this is the heat wave. This is from September. This is an anomaly chart. So it's showing degrees above or below what it's supposed to be for that time of year. And you can just see that across the entire North Pacific, it has been on the order of 3 to, in some cases, 5 degrees above normal. This is just smashed records. It's really pretty scary that there's that much warmth. And really the entire world, the oceans around the world have been significantly above normal for the past year. You can see the La Nina at the equator. So I can do this. So the blue water, colder than average, which is what you'd expect for La Nina. And then this is last week. So this is from January 7th, I believe. Yeah. So you can see that some of that up in the Gulf of Alaska, we've had some mixing with those big storms. So it's bringing cooler water in, but there's still a ton of hot water. And we still have the La Nina at the equator. And in some ways, the 2025 is warmer and more widespread than during the peak of the blob. So this is from a heat wave tracker website that just makes the comparison. So in 2025, which is on the right, it's a lot more red than it was during the blob. Pretty scary. Okay, so what has the biological response been to that? And I like to talk about some unusual observations. The Northwest Center's stoplight chart, Columbia River forecasts, which are based on the stoplight chart, and then This year, some of these ecosystem reports that are analogous to what Jackie just went through, but they're more general. They're not designed necessarily for salmon, but I think they're still informative. So as you would expect, when you have a lot of hot water out in the North Pacific, you get weird stuff going on. So we have marlin that are caught in Oregon. This is actually a yellowfin tuna that I saw on an Oregon beach. These are normally caught down in Los Angeles area, California Bight. We had albacore tuna up in Alaska. There's a really interesting video. This guy spearfished this skipjack tuna in Sitka Harbor, which is pretty bizarre. That's probably at least 1,000 kilometers out of its range, normal range. At the same time, we actually had pretty good salmon fishing in a lot of places, perhaps because of habitat compression, and then also green crabs seem to be making their way north in Southeast Alaska. They seem to do well when it's warmer than average. So that's kind of some of the weird stuff that I heard about, not that there's probably a lot more. Let me now switch to our stoplight chart. So what we're trying to do is use a variety of information from ocean basin scale, things like the PDO, the El Nino, La Niñas, as well as local physical indicators, so temperatures and salinities at different depths off primarily the Oregon coast, and then biological indicators to really understand what is the ocean doing for salmon that are in the ocean. And we have this tuned for Columbia River salmon, but it really captures a lot of the variability, what goes on in the off the California current, the Northern California current, and actually can predict other species as well. And then we come up with ranks down at the bottom. And so each column is a year, an ocean entry year, and then each row is a different indicator. And as if you've seen this talk before, cool years in green, they're good for Northwest salmon, and the red squares are warm years, which are generally bad for Northwest salmon. And what is really amazing is that 2025, which is the furthest over on the end, looks a lot better than either 2014 or 2015, given that we have this massive heat wave that's been out across the North Pacific. So what I'd like to do is just walk through quickly what some of the highlights for 2025 were. We had pretty average ocean basin scale indicators. The top two green ones are the PDO. The PDO has gotten really wonky. It's actually capturing the heating of the globe less so than the pattern of sea surface temperatures it used to be. So I kind of take that with a grain of salt. Because we had strong upwelling in spring and summer, the physical indicators actually looked pretty good. They weren't lots and lots of warm water as you might expect, or as we saw in 2015. And then the biological indicators, the copepods, actually did pretty well as well because of this relatively strong upwelling. And just to remind you, when we say upwelling, it blows out of the north towards the south. The wind pushes the surface waters offshore because of Ekman transport, and it brings this cold, nutrient-rich water up. So in the California current, we end up with this buffer in close to shore where it's this cold, nutrient-rich water, and it keeps that hot water offshore. And what happens is that in the summer, then, once the upwelling ends, which this past year was in August, then that warm water can come in all the way to shore. But as long as there's upwelling, there's this area right along the coast that is not only cold, but it's actually nutrient rich and is doing pretty well. And that's what the copepods are reflecting there. One of the reddest ones we saw were the ichthyoplankton. So these are small little fish that are larval that are we think, very important for salmon when they first enter the ocean. And not only was the biomass low, but the composition of what was there was also typical of unfavorable conditions for salmon. So that is a concern. And then finally, we have the catch of Chinook and coho in our juvenile salmon surveys. Chinook were average, and we had the best ever coho, and that's shown here. So this is this long time series, and it actually is very interesting that Jackie's data for the yearling Chinook look very similar. They were also average. That's what we saw. But coho was the highest we've ever seen, as were chum salmon. So they get the gold star. And yeah, it's not just catches. These actually mean something. So we can relate the catches in our surveys to Columbia River returns of spring Chinook, and this is OPIH, or survival of Columbia River hatchery fish. And you can see it looks pretty average for Chinook, but potentially 2026 return of coho will be above average, which would be great given how many we caught. Some other species we catch out there and have long time series for, you can see sea nettles are kind of back up again. They really took a hit during the blob and previous heat waves. It's interesting, water jellies are also elevated, and then California market squid have kind of dropped back down again. They really seem to do well when we had warm water before, but not so much this year. Brian Burke takes the stoplight chart, does some fancy statistics, and comes up with a forecast for Columbia River salmon. So we've got the spring Chinook forecast for 26 and 27, fall Chinook, and then steelhead. And at least the 2027s look like they're maybe going up a little bit. Hopeful for how low things have been recently. So a little optimism, perhaps. What I want to do now is talk about these other indicators. So this is the California Current Integrated Ecosystem Assessment, and this is their quick view for 2024. 2025 is not out, and what I wanted to do is just quickly walk through things that they were saying are favorable or unfavorable. So for favorable indicators, it really indicates good primary productivity. We've got forage fish upwelling, plankton, etc. Crab landings were also good, zooplankton, which the zooplankton up there is actually the copepods that we use in the stoplight chart. So that is showing in 2024 there was pretty good productivity. Some unfavorable indicators primarily of interest are the harmful algal blooms up north as well as down south. They've had a huge problem with domoic acid and pseudonychia in Southern California. Also concerns about whale entanglements where they get into the crab gear. There's been a pretty dramatic increase in that. Fishery landings, marine heat waves were also unfavorable. And these basin scale conditions, primarily El Niños and La Niñas. Same thing for Alaska. This is the Gulf of Alaska. This is 2024 indicators. Another graphic, and I tried to kind of pull it apart. So things that are increasing, they have seabirds in a variety of places. They seem like they're doing pretty well. Capelin has been doing well. They've had, in 2024, they had offshore upwelling. So it's out in the middle where the upwelled water is because of the way the gyre spins that's been promoting phytoplankton and large zooplankton. What else is positive here? We're seeing more juvenile humpbacks in Icy Strait area and Glacier Bay than they have in the past. Some of the either flat or decreasing trends. For flat that are in black there, intertidal conditions. They're not seeing an increase in dead birds washing up on the beach, which I guess is good. They haven't had harmful algal blooms. However, they did have pretty low pink salmon returns, and then the juvenile salmon and the surveys they do in Southeast Alaska were also down. And the 2025 report is going to be out this Friday. So I was able to get a few ideas of what it's going to show for really the lower trophic levels, the bottom up productivity. It looks like capelin are actually declining in a lot of areas. Seabirds seem to be doing pretty well, herring and eulachon as well, and they got a pretty good pink return throughout Alaska this past year. Okay, looking forward, I just want to talk quickly about the El Nino, La Nina seasonal forecast and then ocean temperatures. So this is the El Nino, La Nina forecast. So this is time on the bottom. It starts in December, January, February is the first set of bars, goes all the way to August, September, October, so next fall. The blue bars are showing the La Nina, so that's currently out there. They're expecting that to go away. We're going to have neutral conditions starting this spring. Of concern are these red bars that are starting to go up, which is El Nino. But like Jackie said, this is a warming ocean. So whether that's really El Nino or just the fact that our oceans are really warm right now, I don't think we can tell. And this is like the worst possible time to forecast El Ninos. So you got to kind of wait a few months until I think the models work a lot better. This is trying to forecast what the ocean conditions are going to be 6-8 months out, which is pretty tough. This is the terrestrial forecast that NOAA does. This is a 3-month showing what the winter is. And this is really a classic La Nina pattern. So it's cool and wet. So above average precipitation and below average temperatures up in the northern tier, and then warm and dry in the southern tier. But whether this really happens or not, this is where we're using the past to predict the future. And at some point, it's going to break down. So we shall see. And then finally, these are the sea surface temperature forecasts for this spring, kind of late spring, and then early summer. The red is above average temperatures. These are anomalies again. What is interesting, or hopeful at least, is that along our coast, it tends to be cooler. It's going to be average, which these days is pretty good. So that's hopeful for salmon that are coming out, but for salmon that are out in the middle of the Gulf of Alaska or steelhead that have to go all the way across, not so great. And with that, I will open it up for questions. And we have mics. Will.
I can just project if folks can hear me. I'm curious about, saw the Canadian presentation increasing anchovy biomass. I know there's been issues with thiamine deficiency in California linked to anchovy dominated diets. Do we have any data on thiamine deficiency in Oregon, Washington, D.C. in light of these changing food conditions? And is that something we should be looking at?
That is a good question. I know that they've seen it in the Rogue. There's been some thiamine. So that the question for those of you online, I don't know if you heard it, is what is thiamine doing, given that anchovies have high levels of thiamase, and whether we're seeing it in salmon in Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. Jackie, can you answer that? Have you guys seen it? Is she on?
I'm on. It just takes me a while to figure out Zoom. Sorry. All I can note is that while the anchovy biomass has been increasing, it's still not a dominant part of the juvenile salmon diet. So I do want to make that note. However, there are researchers in UBC that are focusing, and I feel I might be wrong there, but I think primarily on the downward migrating salmon and the impact from, tire sourced runoff there. DFO is currently not working on that. But again, all I can say is that these diets are not dominated at this time by anchovy.
Oh, yes. So for those of you online, if you use the Q&A feature, we can get your questions and try and answer them. Other questions in the room? Way back there. Yeah.
Thanks, Laurie. Great presentation. Yourself and others. Question on evolutionary potential for Pacific salmon. What are your thoughts there? Are we seeing flexibility in this current heat environment and along with their prey?
That is the million-dollar question, is whether they can respond enough. And I tell people that we don't have big control over the ocean. We do in a big way, but we can't adjust it from year to year. But we need to have the healthiest and the most diverse group of salmon enter the ocean as possible as we can possibly get, so that some of them are gonna survive this. We don't know what is gonna work in the ocean right now. It is very different than what they have evolved with the last however many millennia. So from a what we can do management standpoint, having all the habitat we can get that's quality to increase the diversity, so the time, the size, the health of the time and size is as diverse as it can get for every single salmon that enters the ocean, and we want them as healthy as possible. I think that there is huge selective pressure going on. I mean, I think the steelhead, the fact that steelhead populations across the board have really gone down, reflect the fact that they are going out into the absolute worst of it. And it's not a good place to be when you've got heat waves. It's not just warm water, which means that your metabolism goes up because these are all cold-blooded creatures, but the productivity is also very, very reduced, which is kind of why we have the heat waves in the first place, is that there's not that winter mixing that normally goes on. So the productivity is very low as well. And I think that there are some, particularly like steelhead, Lower Columbia steelhead, and I that's what I know. We know that they're kind of different than other parts of the Columbia steelhead coming out, and how they behave as they're moving through the lower river, and then once they get out into the ocean. And so potentially these really subtle differences that in most cases we don't even know exist because we don't sample fish out in the ocean very well, hopefully some of those are going to be successful. But whether they can respond as quickly as possible, certainly when we've seen these big fish kills in 2020 or 2015, with it was so hot, and then now what is it, 2023, I think, when the Fraser and the Columbia again were super hot, and 90% of the fish didn't make it up to the spawning channel. That's huge selection. If there was any temperature, heritability associated with the survivors, that's big. So yeah, I don't know. That's the $1 million question. And Jackie, feel free to jump in anytime.
Again, Laurie, that was a great presentation. I think I might be putting you on the spot here, but sorry for that. I noticed that, well, this is focused on salmon, but you also mentioned other finfish like petrale, lingcod. I was wondering if you had an opinion about maybe how these warmer temperatures would impact migration of halibut. Halibut migrate from the north to the south. And I was also wondering if these temperatures also dictate maybe halibut's feeding habits.
Yeah, I do not know. I don't know that much about halibut. I will say that as a group, fish, their metabolic rate is determined by the temperature. So if temperature is going up, they have to eat more to survive. So that's physiology. That's fish physiology 101. So if it's warmer, they're going to have to eat more. No question. I don't know. Jackie, do you know anything about halibut migrations?
No, that question did nicely put us on the spot. So I can't, I'm not in tune with recent work or what's going on with halibut from the Halibut Commission and their stock assessments and I, but I will agree 100% with what Laurie said. As temperature goes up, and we have seen for things that live on the ocean floor increases in temperature, still, within their tolerant ranges, they are going to need to eat more. They're also undergoing, as we illustrated, hypoxic events, so that's adding more stress. There is information to suggest that ground fish will seek out colder water if it's still within their feeding niche by going deeper. So they do have some ways of behaving and getting around it, but warmer temperatures does mean increased metabolic demand and need for more food. And if it's nutritious, great. If it's not, it's going to be difficult.
Great. Certainly appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of questions online, or one is actually a response. So Jen Bolt is online and she has a response to Will's question. So Jen, did you want to unmute yourself and respond?
Oh, sure. I was just going to add that with regards to the thiamine question, there are a couple researchers at UBC or University of British Columbia looking at establishing baseline levels of thiamine in Chinook salmon and then also in prey in British Columbia.
And then the other question online is from Katie Howard. She says, thank you for the presentation. I'm curious, for both US West Coast and BC juvenile salmon surveys, are you finding the timing of the dispersal of juvenile salmon through coastal habitats changing with changing temperatures? Is that impacting your survey designs, and does it impact how you are interpreting survey results across time?
That's a great question. I, off the top of my head, cannot think that we are seeing, I don't think we've looked at our data. I know that if you look at counts of salmon juveniles going out in the Bonneville, across Bonneville Dam, that the timing of that is actually getting earlier. And we are meeting in 2 weeks within the juvenile salmon group at the Northwest Center. And one of the suggestions that I've heard is actually maybe we should be moving earlier, that we are really, our survey consistently for the last 28 years has been in the last 2 weeks of June. And by then, a lot of the salmon, particularly spring Chinook, have already left. And so we're not capturing it. Jackie, comments on that? You'd be seeing differences in timing?
I want to say yes. And at the same time, we don't have the ability to detect it like you guys do with our survey. Our summer survey off of the west coast of Vancouver Island is a month long. So it does allow us, I guess, to try to detect maybe changes that we see across the time series from 2017 when we've been out there for a month. But one of the constraints about doing these large-scale surveys is the availability of these ships. So we have talked about how we do probably need to move it or consider at least moving it forward. But I can't foresee us being able to do that given what these ships, these vessels, these Coast Guard vessels are also used for. So that's a constraint. So we can go to our modeling ability. And I told you that we're using spatial temporal models to produce these indices. They also allow us to put in covariates that we think might impact either the abundance or the distribution. And I did not mention that the models are trained on a whole suite of tows, which prior to about 2015, 2016 on the outer coast did include tows in Central Coast, North Coast, and towards the very early part of the time series, Southeast Alaska. All of that is to say we could include things like temperature to see how that is impacting what we see in terms of distribution and abundance. We just haven't gotten there yet. But it is certainly something we are going to work on because it needs to be a part of what we're reporting out on. And because we can't necessarily change the timing of our surveys, then something that we can, in a way, calibrate for.
Thanks, Laurie, and thanks, Jackie. I've got to step away to another meeting, but before I do that, I wanted to say thank you to Laurie. I think this is going to be your last opportunity to present this information to the commission. I know you've been doing it for a number of years. I've lost count the number of years that you've been doing it. And I just want to say on behalf of the community, Laurie, you transformed, I think, the way that we think and talk about ocean conditions. It certainly has drawn in a huge number of the community every year to hear what you have to say. So thanks very much. I know we may see you in February too. There's a pretty good chance of that. But this is your last opportunity to present this, and I want to say thanks.
Thank you. And I have to say it works both ways, because this has provided me the opportunity to become an expert in this stuff, and stuff that I never would have delved into. And I can't tell you how many papers I've read and tried to understand so that I can explain here. So it's been wonderful and an amazing opportunity. I'm glad you guys are receptive and willing to.
Yeah, Larry, thanks again for the presentation. Just a question. I didn't see nothing in California sea lions and in any of your stuff, but just you or the other lady, what, any idea on how much, I guess, whether they're permanent or they come seasonally or whatever, but any idea on how much impacts or what's the worst that I think is there? Because I think that's something that the tribes have been trying to really get a handle on.
Yeah.
Just a question.
The sea lions are really tricky, especially for looking at juveniles that they're consuming, because they eat a lot of forage fish. And so really trying to dial in and see how much we think that, if you have forage fish, herrings, surf smelt, anchovies, whatever, there's salmon mixed in there, and they're just going after these schools of fish, and they happen to get some salmon. I don't think they're necessarily eating discrete, other than cases where like harbor seals sit right next to the river mouth, and as the salmon come out, they nail them. There is actually a new paper that just came out by Lewis et al. On stellar sea lion consumption of fall chinook, and they estimated that 1 million Columbia River fall chinook are getting eaten every year by stellar sea lions that have colonies on the Washington coast. And that was using genetic data. So I think that the genetics, you analyze the poop, basically, really has the ability to transform our understanding of what portion of the diet. The same thing is true with seabirds. We know that seabirds eat a lot of forage fish. Sometimes salmon are mixed in there. When we've gotten permits to look at seabird diets, sometimes it's actually really scary how many juvenile salmon are in there. We do not study predation very well. It is really tricky because it's really hard to catch predators in the act. It's one thing with like seals or sea lions that you can get the scat samples, you can look through the bones. Marine fish is a whole group of fish that we have absolutely no idea. And Bob Emmett, back in the day, looked at hake. He was catching hake at night off the mouth of the Columbia, the idea being that all these juvenile salmon are entering right there, sampled the hake. He came up with, I think, 12 salmon in hake stomachs out of thousands of stomachs that they looked at, and estimated that that was almost 2 million salmon that they were eating because the hake population is so big. So the pinnipeds, the marine mammals, and we don't know anything about porpoise and dolphin diets either. Again, they eat forage fish. We don't know how much of that is salmon. But trying to get salmon or predators in the act of feeding is really, really tough. And for species that come up on shore and poop there, so you can get it, you can see, or you go out and follow the killer whales around with a fishing net or a pool net, I should say, and get it that way, then you can get it from genetics. Otherwise, it is really hard. And that is something that I think we would all do much better if we could understand predation better, because who knows? We don't even know who the major predators are. We don't know if it's seabirds, if it's marine mammals, or if it's fish. We have absolutely no idea in all the 30 years of looking at it. So Jackie, you want to comment on that? I think you guys are doing a little better job than we are.
Well, we do have active research on marine mammal poop. So as you say, that is easier to get, perhaps more disgusting than studying seabird predation. But seabird predation, Mark Hipner with Environment and Climate Change Canada has been actively looking at seabird predation on Scott Islands, which is off of the northern portion of Vancouver Island, and other suites of islands throughout a few other suites of islands in, I guess, Central Coast, West Coast, Vancouver Island area. So yes, seabirds are eating juvenile salmon, very small salmon. The other thing that is missing, I wouldn't say, Mark has been able to fill in the gap as much as we need, but another missing portion for birds is, of course, the downstream or the estuary predation. And that is likely an area of, I would guess, high mortality due to bird predation. And as far as I know, underfunded and still a large gap. So I totally concur with Laurie.
Other questions? Well, thank you for coming and attending and being engaged. So it's been a great experience, and I leave it in the very capable hands of Marisa, who will present next year.